I just want to kick it off by saying I know each of you have had your own journeys, right? You can tell your own stories, and I just would ask you to be vulnerable. And I think if we're vulnerable and we tell our stories, then it will encourage other people to want to have dialogue. And so, with that, we'll go ahead and jump into it. So, Dorothy, I'm gonna tee it up with you.
Okay.
You have been in corporate America for a long time, and have had your journey.
Yes.
Kick us off and talk to us about how you see relationships between women across differences.
I'm a brand marketer that I've done for about 16 years, and then I went over into nonprofit to lead the global marketing effort for Susan G. Komen, and I am in transition now, so I had to take a step away to rebalance, is what I will call it, to move back into my next chapter, which I'm working on now. But I will tell you, as life stages go, your relationship with other women in corporate America grow. And what I mean by that is when I was new in the industry and I was young and I had time and I wasn't married, I think we had a different purview of what does success look like and who do I need to associate with. And for all intents and purposes, I'm a Gen X person, so my parents said the white male, go after that. That's where you want to go. Ignore everybody else. And so you sort of like said, okay, if he can be a CEO, that's what I want to do. And that's how we approached it. As you go through your career and you start having a family, that's probably when I got pregnant with my daughter was when I saw the dynamics of women. Some that were for me, some that were against me. Some who wanted children and couldn't have children, so they took that frustration out on me. That was my experience with my boss at the time.
Wow.
And so then I had to learn to be flexible on how we deal with these types of relationships. I do think that the third layer is when you get into a position of power and influence. So when I made director, where now I'm not only managing people, I'm influencing others and I have to compete. I think there's another level of expectation of one, how you deal with other women, but two, how do you deal with the men? Because at the end of the day, there are so many stereotypes around black females, especially the ones in power. And here's the one thing I will end you with that someone told me. You cannot get successful at this company until people want to work for you. They need to be saying, Dorothy, I want to be on your team. And I came back and said, look, I might not have the style that you want me to go out and golf every weekend and party. I have the time a 5-year-old. I'm a single mom. I said, I might have low trial, but I have high repeat. So those who come and work for me love me and they always want to come back. And I said, I can't conform to that because I just didn't have enough time in the day to do it. Mm-hmm. But I do think your relationships across your journey evolve and transcends as you move in different stages across the board.
And as a woman of color, what has that been like? Have you at times found yourself fearful of challenging the status quo?
I would say absolutely. I remember when I first got into a controller role, first African American woman that I knew who was in a controller role. I was afraid to make a mistake, and I spoke to mentors. I even spoke to Trudy about that because I was afraid of what it would be for other women, in particular other women of color, if I made a mistake, because I was their first person to have this experience. So I think that for me, having a mentor tell me, what's the worst that could happen? And I was like, they could fire me. I got a child. I got to eat, all these other things that, it's just all this fear. Every time I was in a meeting, just saying, oh my God, if I say the wrong thing, if I do the wrong thing, this meeting went bad. They're going to fire me. I'm going to lose my home. My child's not going to eat. Putting all those fears on the table and saying, really, if that's the worst that can happen, is that really the worst that can happen? I was a widower. Is that the worst that can happen? I'm going to be okay. And I'm talented. I have skills, and I'm so glad that I had mentors that could pour into me and tell me and reaffirm me. And Trudy always telling me, get the itty bitty committee out of your head. And now, because those words were spoken to me, I work with new college grads, and I'm telling them, get the itty bitty committee out of your head. You are talented, you're gifted. And I just think that it's so important. I don't regret going through that fear. I don't regret going through the failures and different things like that, because I see now I'm pouring that back into so many other people that are entering the workforce.
Okay, so we have heard from two women of color, African Americans, who have had their journey. All women have their journey. Do you think, Diana, that it's different journey for white women versus women of color?
If you would have asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said no. I think it's all the same. But then as my awareness grew and as I really started, connecting with women of color, there was a pivotal point that I had one time. I was actually working a very tough issue with the senior finance over field. It was a tough issue. It was actually a pricing issue, and it was going to impact our customers. And so I'd been working it, and I ran into him into the cafeteria. I had known him 20 years. Guess what? I solved it in the cafeteria with him. And the reason I could solve that problem with him is because I'd known him 20 years, because I'd been in corporate America 20 years. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, we grew up together. I was familiar with him. He trusted me. He knew me. Mm-hmm. And so when I said, this is what I think we need to go do, so I was able to drive my business results simply because I'd been in corporate America 20 years. 20 years, if you'd looked at finance at where I worked, there was no African American. So I was preferentially advantaged over any other woman of color because I had the relationship. And that senior leader knew me because I was probably a lot like his wife. And only when you start having those realizations that you really come in and you start talking about how do we start getting the connections, like what you say, the allies, because what happens in everyone when we're in business, we're trying to minimize risk. And risk is where we start knowing each other because we start trusting each other and we start having some type of a bond or a commitment within that. So the challenge that you have with that right now is that a lot of people really don't get it and they just don't understand it. They do believe it's that common problem that my journey, everyone else's journey is like my journey. It's too much self-focused on them. But when you really step back, that was the moment that I sat there. And I remember, some mentors in my life, Shauna Wilson and Rose Broussard. I trusted them and I went with it, but that was the point I owned it. When I understood, I was able to drive results, and a woman of color would not have been able to have been that advantage in that moment.
If you look at Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn Monroe had her moment of aha. And as the story goes, Ella Fitzgerald was trying to secure an opportunity to perform. And she recognized that Ella standing on her own would never be able to get the support. And so she told the producer, I will be here personally every night to back Ella up. Like, she put her equity out on the line on her behalf. And so why can't we get more women to use their equity in a way to help? Stephanie, why don't you chime in?
One thing that I would say is it's very easy to see someone's inadequacies, and we're quick to point those out and to kind of just stay on those. But in reality, we all have our own itty bitty committee. I think what's really important is being able to look beyond the inadequacies to see the potential. And a lot of times people don't see the potential in themselves. And so when a mentor or a strong woman says, I see this in you, that is so powerful to the manager and really makes them kind of rise up. And I would have to say that my last boss that I had, she saw the potential in me. There were days when I'm like, I don't deserve to be here. The IDI committee was loud and clear, and it told me exactly where I needed to be, and it wasn't in that position of power. And my boss said, no, ma'am, this is where you need to be. You deserve this role. Stand up and own it, and we're going to own it together. And so I would just say, women, we need to really focus on the potential in other women and watch them rise to the occasion and really just soar.
Is this, Lisa, a U.S. phenomenon? I mean, you being from Canada, this dialogue about, you know, women across differences and different journeys. Is that unique to the U.S. from your perspective, or did you have and do you have now your own experiences with women across differences?
I think that, you know, Canada, like the United States, there's such a fabric of diversity, and my experience is very similar, although my journey, you know, may be slightly different than everyone else in this room. I think there's a lot of common threads that I see in Canada and here as well. I just think that there's an opportunity for women wherever, on either side of the border. I think these are common issues, and I don't see a difference. I think that it's always been fairly male-dominated, and I see the struggle of women, whether it's on this side of the border or that. I can only speak to my own career and my own experiences, and I didn't have a lot of female role models to aspire to. And when I think of my own journey, I wish I had. And the women that were in power weren't always the supportive ones I thought, which, you know, would give me a leg up or a guidance or advice. So I think I struggled finding the mentors for me in my world as I progressed through my career. So I think it's the same on both sides, even though, the demographics might be slightly different. And, I lived in different parts of Canada, as well as I lived for a part of about 3 years in Japan as well. So in Asia as well, I saw the differences and how people treated me as a foreigner and as a woman. And, to experience that, it's very unique. And so, I feel very blessed to have had those experiences, but I think that women on both sides of the border, whether it's Canada, the United States, or Europe, I think we all struggle in trying to find, role models and leaders, and how do we manage and deal with a fairly predominantly male society.
The research is pretty loud when we look at the disconnects, particularly among white women and women of color. Okay, now if you're a woman of color, and Denny and Gilda, you have your skin color. What the research says is that you guys actually are more easily accepted. Has that been your experience?
I would have to agree. I think you do perhaps have that advantage maybe to get your foot in the door. However, I still believe that there is still that ceiling where the men, they don't take it much further if you have a male boss. And that's always been the case, pretty much the case in my situation. I've always was able to get my foot in the door and get the interview and get the job. However, there just wasn't that much promotion beyond that, because it was more or less, in my particular position, it was more or less a male-dominated area.
Did you have other women to reach out to you, like to wrap their arms around you when you came into to your employer?
No, once I was in there, I was accepted, and I mean, all the female managers that were there, they were pretty accepting of me over maybe a darker skin, a woman of color. But however, it was still, I didn't find much help from the female managers there, but I found more acceptance on the male side.
Gilda, again, you're a beautiful Creole woman. Has that been your experience as well?
Yes, I would say to a certain extent. At first, when I first get there, I guess, they really don't know what I am.
Right.
But then afterward, then there's that kind of disconnect and standoffishness. And then I guess like in my present position, I was fortunate to have a female boss, even though she was a white woman, Caucasian woman. She, and along with the assistant in control, they were the ones that I guess saw me and what I was doing, whereas other pharmacists, the leadership role that I was taking in my current job. And so they said, Gilda, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And they got me into this leadership development class that I took. And then, but I got the backflack came from my coworkers. They were labeling me as the golden child, why are you doing this? And they calling on you to do everything. But they weren't taking the leadership roles. They weren't going out and trying to do extra. Oh, don't do that. Why are you doing that? So I got more backslash from my coworkers than I did from the administration,
Gosh, that's
and then I found that, as I go on and I take these leadership courses, I find it is important to connect with other people, other departments. It's just that, you have to make friends and connections with other departments for you to get places and get things done, because now in my role that I'm in now, I meet with other physicians and nurses, so I have to develop those relationships, and a lot of those are women also in those fields. So I think it's important to not just develop relationships within your department, but outside of your
Yeah.
department as well. But I guess mine came from the coworkers in my department,
yeah.
male and female coworkers,
Yeah.
you know, that you think are your friends and people you
Yeah.
associate with, that they gave me the backslash, you know.
Yeah. So, this idea of you're the chosen one because, you have nice hair and light skin and all that. I mean, there's a bunch of research to support that. Now, Ms. Shearer, you are a beautiful, tall, black female. Smart. Have you, in your journey, experienced that initial stereotype that is applied towards black women? Did you have to overcome that? And if so, how?
And maybe I was just naive. So I grew up in an African American community, went to school with all white. So my cousin and I were the only two African American in the school, right? And so I guess I grew up thinking everything was equal. Well, I guess a little bit naive in that I thought everything was equal, except for my dad, like Dorothy would say. You shed who you are, right? And you assimilate. You follow the white male. That's what you do. Kind of forget who you are. And so in my subconscious mind, I guess that's kind of how I lived my life. I never had any female African American role models. I never had any African American role models, period. And I'm kind of on the cusp of being a baby boomer and a Gen Xer, right? Probably thinking more of a Gen Xer. But I've always had white females who have been my mentors, my sponsors, who have reached out to me, who have seen something in me and given me that positive feedback that you speak about. It's always been a white female. Never has there been a black female. It's almost like, and I went to a company. When I went to that company, it was very interesting, and I was so excited because they had an African American resource group. And so I thought, boy, I get to work with other people who look like me. And I can remember the very first event that I went to, and no one said a word to me. Wow. And there were women that were African American that were in VP roles and director roles. No one said a word. And that was very telling for me. Wow. And it wasn't until later, as I continued to progress within that organization, that even people would come back, people that looked like me that were part of that resource group, until they found out at that particular time, I think I was actually a director. So as I continued to move up into the director and VP role, then they would talk to me. But prior to that, there was absolutely nothing.
As young white females, does any of this cross your mind?
So I actually work for a domestic violence shelter in Dallas, but I do prevention for sexual assault and DV. And our organization is predominantly female just because domestic violence is, we do serve men as well, but we mostly serve women. And our team is unique because I'm on the prevention team. We have one male on our team, and the rest are all younger, lower 30s, late 20s. And my boss actually, she was on our team, and now I believe she's in her late 20s, and she's African American. So it was really exciting for her because she worked for the organization for 5 years and then got promoted. And I think for me, my experience has been a lot different than the stories that I hear. We have tough conversations all the time with members of our team specifically because we go into schools and we address gender roles and stereotypes and these ideas and what they do to people. So I feel like I don't want to say everything's amazing, but it's a nice environment where I'm around strong women from all walks of life, and there's a lot of encouragement to have conversations that can be uncomfortable, and we feel sort of it's just a very open dialogue a lot with our team, and we have these conversations all the time. I think if I wasn't at this organization, I would have different experiences. But even getting the job, having those connections, I think having, my dad, who's obviously a white male, and acknowledging that there are privileges that I had that other people didn't.
Yeah.
I think is part of the first step. And it was nice having, him. He had a lot of connections in
Yeah.
getting the job.
Right.
So I think that helped. But our team, we're very purposeful. When we hire people, we like to have a diverse team because we go to schools. We're in Oak Cliff, we're in Plano, we're in Mesquite. I mean, we're all over. So we like to even think about as we're presenting to schools, do you have somebody who's African American go to a predominantly African American school, or should we have
Mix
me
it up.
go? Should we curveball? So we have those discussions a lot, and I think it helps for this idea of really empowering women.
Yeah.
Because I'm around so many strong.
So you recognized that you had a benefit, right? And you spoke it out just without any hesitation whatsoever. Most white people don't recognize that there is an advantage, just the privilege of the skin, right? And so part of what we have to do in the dialogue to have that courageous conversation is to just be honest and forthright and say, okay, there are inequities. We have to start with the truth. There are inequities, and right now the advantage is to members of the Caucasian race because as Mary Ellen says, there's only one race, but the human race, which I love my baby for reminding me of that. But most individuals, white men, don't recognize that they have the privileges. That it just hasn't come to the forefront. Now, Sarah, you're in education.
Yes.
What do you find are your experiences there? And I'm wondering out loud because Nikki's millennial.
Yes.
I haven't done the research yet, but I think when you're kids and you're younger, that it's easier. I mean, you grew up with Mary Ellen, and now both of you guys are in education. But I'm wondering if, as the higher you go, does the dynamics, do they start to change? So what are you seeing right now at the stage where you are?
Right now in the education field, obviously we're predominantly women. But very few women go to administrative roles. And I'm actually currently a director of an early learning center. And that was a huge step for me to think that I was worthy enough as a woman to move up in administration, because I've been told so many times, you want to work for a male principal. You want to work for a male principal. You don't want to work for a woman, because she's labeled as X, Y, and Z. And so I didn't want to be that woman, and I didn't want to be labeled. And I think that was a huge thing holding me back. And it was actually a principal of mine. She was an African-American woman, and she was very strong. And she looked at me and said, Sarah, you can't have these fears hold you back, because I see you as a leader, and I think that you relate with women and you're positive and you can influence others. And I think that you need to move into the administrative role. And that was the first time that I thought, okay, I can do this. And kind of piggybacking on my sister, we did grow up in a very education-driven family. My dad always told me there was no question I was going to college. It was, you're going to college. And so my whole life I thought, okay, this is where I'm headed towards. But like my sister said, we grew up in a very kind of open dialogue family. My parents talked about everything, and we really had we were exposed to a lot of cultures. We traveled a lot. And so I think that kind of helped to relate to others a lot better, because my parents, just because we're from a white family and we did live in a pretty privileged home, that doesn't mean you can't have empathy towards others and you can't relate to other people. And so I think that shaped our views a lot on other people. So I think I'm really thankful that my parents have exposed me to that and have exposed me to other cultures and other people, and that I'm not the best person because I've had all these privileges, that other people have things as well. And so I'm really thankful that we have grown up in this area. And I think a lot has to do with growing up in Plano.
Well, I think your point about what you were taught as a kid
Right.
is spot on.
Right.
We were chatting earlier about, what are we teaching our daughters about looking at other women, or what are we teaching our sons about how to treat women. And, Mike and I have open dialogue about how he was raised. He was raised in a family where the grandmother, God love her, she just worshiped the boys. It was all about the boys. And so, a lot of his worldview was shaped by the mindset that I'm the guy, I can do anything, I can have anything, I can be anything. And his sister, who was the only girl in the house, really struggled to find her voice. She didn't have anybody speaking possibility into her spirit, right? She didn't have that. And there was an open dialogue. Now here's the realies. Now, people have dialogue, but they have dialogue at the dinner table. And I'm going to tell you, I'll give you an example, and then I want to open it up, and y'all just jump in wherever you want to jump in. I had a client, and she was telling a story that her son, who was in second grade, had show and tell day. And so they were going to be able to tell the story about something that had happened the day before. And so this is the story that he told. And she is African American, and her son obviously is African American. So he told the class that at dinner last night, my mommy said, "Those white people are getting on my last nerve." And that was the story that this little boy was telling. So see, and yes, I believe that she said it, right? And because I can tell you that I came home many nights to Mike and went, I'm getting ready to kill some white men. I'm getting ready to take some people outside and have and look, the times I had to stop him, right, from going, okay, he did what? And she said what? And he was like, because he's my protector, right? He's gonna go out and take some people out. But this little boy, that's what he was hearing. And so that is what he said. And that is what was shaping his worldview. So how do we take the conversations from the dinner table and really have them courageously? Because the truth of the matter is probably everybody in this room at some point, you either heard a grandparent use an incorrect label, you either witnessed somebody in your family acting out against differences. And I always like to say, we're only one cousin away from a crackhead. I mean, everybody likes to think that, oh, we're all that because we got our education but everybody in here has got somebody in their family, right? So, if we go back and we really think about what Diana said about human to human, what do we need to do to get there and sow seeds into the kids that give them this belief that we have to be right to each other. So anybody jump in.
We are all a product of our experiences, and the world my parents grew up in the middle of the 60s of the civil rights movement, has shaped their view. They're 75.
Yeah.
They're not changing. But the pure view I have, where I started seeing more experience, is different. My daughter's very different. So you talk about, I lived in a black-white world. I was the only black at my all-girl white school, and I went away to boarding school in Connecticut, and I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. Totally different view. My daughter, she really doesn't see color. She has Indian friends, Hispanic friends, Japanese friends, boys, girls, and she sees that. The notion is about racism, and we have to start embracing it. And what I tell people is that everyone has racist tendencies. Right. The problem is you don't admit to it. So my dad and my mother have probably more racial tendencies than me because racism was committed against them. And so I call him out on it. I said, that's a very racist thing you just said, Dad. And he uses things like, he has, and he's getting better, but cracker. I said, stop saying that. Lauren is in here. Don't spread that. But then when I take a step back and I'm with my black girlfriends, I have observed us speaking in a different way than with, and it's not negative or intentional, but then when I'm with my white girlfriends or my Hispanic girlfriend, it's a different conversation. And what I attribute that to is, yes, I have racial tendencies too because of experiences I've had. And I think the problem is no one is willing to embrace them.
Yeah.
And what I've learned and have been is that that's not who I want to be. And so I practice tolerance and trying to reshape my views on things that I saw when I was growing up. Because that's where the foundation is.
Yeah,
And, you know,
that's right.
being a business owner, my dad felt discriminated against because he could never make his business bigger because the contracts always went to his white counterparts. That was ingrained in the first 15, 20 years in my head that white people won't let you get ahead.
You know, Dorothy, I
You
would
know.
take that baton from you because there was a point in my life that I had to talk to my dad, and I said, "You can't say that in my home."
Exactly.
And it's because of just the generational differences, but it starts just with that. And it's hard to tell your parent, you can't say that into my home. But I agree with you, it's also about the experiences because, you know, I've raised my daughter in Collin County, she's private school, everything. So the way I complemented that was the experiences. So she's done mission work around the world, Africa. She's done on 6 international mission trips. And I was sharing with Sherry, she had come back from a mission trip and we were at Lifetime. And she saw just a beautiful African American child. And she just went over there and picked her up. I felt the hair stand up on my back of my neck because you just can't go pick up anyone's child, right? She just saw a beautiful child and she didn't understand there was any, she didn't think about how would the mother receive a white
Girl. Yes.
and it was received beautifully. And so you felt it go back down within that. So you sat there, but there's still a protection even as you're trying to develop this global sense of community and
Right.
acceptance and cultural. But and I trained her, and then I thought for a moment, have I made her vulnerable? But it was received well. So back to the point, they don't see. You know, I've tried to raise a child also that doesn't see color, but then I've also helped her said, but you have to understand that there are privileges and that opportunity doesn't always knock the same way. And we have very candid conversations about that. And how do you really step back in and think about the humanity of all of us? And I love what your daughter says, there is just one race, there is just one humanity. But at that same point in time, you have to have sensitivities because other people have had different experiences. And sometimes what you do with them might be a violation of what they think your right is back within them.
Yeah.
But again, you know, it's an awareness. It's tough work,
Yeah.
but we have to set the tone of what that work is.
There's not a person living on the face of the planet that doesn't have biases because that's how man survived. We had to put things into categories in order to thrive. I have seen, and I'm wondering out loud if you guys have seen it too, and if this is a dynamic that we have to explore. You know, when Mare was growing up and Adam was growing up, it was like these two ladies have been friends with Mare for a long time. But when they were younger, it seemed to be much easier, right? And then all of a sudden, Mary got to be of the age where, okay, now we're going to be vying for the same boy, right? And then it was like, all right, now women start to look at each other as competitors rather than the way that we really. Yeah, I'm convinced. I mean, I don't have the data yet, but I'm convinced that there is a shift that happens, and we no longer see each other as human to human. You know, we whether we're aware of it or not aware of it, things start to change. And I remember one of Mary Ellen's other friends who is not here today, who couldn't be with us. But I remember at one point they were talking about race, and she said, "You don't know, Mary Ellen, how many times I've had to defend your race." And this was in their circles, right? So they went from, hey, let's go out, and that's when they moved in packs and groups, right? I mean, it's like 10 of us. We're gonna go walk the neighborhood, all 10 of us together. They moved in packs, and something did happen. Fortunately, their relationship has maintained a high level of integrity and authenticity. But I wonder if that change, if we could get a hold of that, if that would help, because something does change, and we start to see each other as enemies rather than as colleagues. Do you guys do you know what I'm talking about? You want to comment?
The thing that keeps coming to me as we're talking is, at the end of the day, everybody wants to know that they matter.
Yeah.
And I think in our quest to do life, whether it's climbing the corporate ladder or whether it's taking care of our kids or whatever it is, in our quest around our priorities, we get so involved in those priorities, we're going so fast that we forget that people want to matter.
Yeah.
And I think if we slow down and step back, and in every interaction, remember that people want to matter.
Yeah.
And so how do I make sure this person knows that they matter, and not be afraid that that somehow means that I matter less? Yeah, I think, as I just listened to the conversation today, and I just so appreciated what you all were saying about your family willing to have the hard conversations, and what you were saying about your daughter picking up the African American child. And again, I just keep coming back to, we all want to matter. We just want to. And I think when we can let down our guard and realize that we all want to matter, it allows us to be our authentic self. So what you were speaking to. And I know, as an African American person, I think the tone of my language changes a little bit. And so the words that I use when I'm with my African American girlfriends versus when I'm more with my white or Caucasian girlfriends, it changes. And so why is that? Why do I feel like I need to kind of reinvent myself every time I have a conversation? And so it starts with me, right? Why to be able to be, I think, courageous enough to be the same person
All the
regardless of where I am.
Yeah. Dorothy, I think you hit it on the head. So that level of self-worth gets challenged for women of color, because then they get rejected by the white boys, who now their mom is like, okay, well, Mary Ellen was good and pretty and all that when she was like not wanting to date you, but now she wants to date you. Oh, hell to the no. Okay, and so
And the second one, she's getting rejected by the black boys.
yes.
So, I mean, when I was growing up, my dad would say, don't bring a white girl home, and girls, don't you bring a white man home. That's my parents.
Yeah.
But now my daughter, and I'm hearing is, they're getting rejected by the white boy who she likes. I mean, she thinks that Bryson is the cutest thing. And I'm like, go for it, honey. It doesn't matter what color he is. Just, as long as he treats you kind,
Right.
he's, provides. But she's getting also rejected by the black boys.
Yeah.
Completely.
Because she likes the way.
No, she likes them too. They're not interested in her at all. So what happens is, and I hear with my girlfriend with prom, 7 black girls go to the prom by themselves.
Right. Right.
No dates, no one asking them, and this is where I think it goes to the relationship component of it. What do we train our girls around how to be in relationships?
Yeah.
And I think that's a whole different topic and dynamic.
But
that's
Dorothy,
cultural.
you're hitting on something that's so important, because Diana, you'll remember when we were doing the work at PepsiCo, one of the things was that the black men were not supportive of the black women, right? And so now you've got white women who are not supportive of women of color. You've got black men that are not supportive of women of color. You got white men who are afraid of women of color. And so the dynamic just becomes exhaustive. So for a woman of color, you're constantly trying to assimilate, but sometimes you don't even know who you're trying to assimilate to.
Both sides, yeah.
Because it becomes both sides, right?
That is true.
And so it's incredibly important for us to, I think, challenge ourselves to see what are the messages that we're sending about how we show up, about what we do, and to start wrapping this thing up. What I really wanted to do as a part of writing the book is to challenge every woman to take 10 women across all different spectrums and pour into them. Like, see that possibility before they can see it. Like, let's make a pledge that this is what we'll do. We will get intentional, and hopefully it will spark, a different kind of dialogue, and we'll learn. Like, we'll actually open up our heart and, acquire some knowledge, because if you don't know what you don't know, how do you ever change? How do you ever, wrap your head around this? So I want to, encourage all of us to have a different kind of conversation at the dinner table, a different kind of conversation at the boardroom table, different kind of conversation in the community. And I thank each of you again for being a part of this dialogue. I think it's incredibly important. And if not us, then who? If not now, then when? Like, I just feel like I've been having this conversation for 30 years. I really do. I feel like I've been having this conversation for 30 years. And so hopefully we'll take the conversation into a much broader audience, and we'll help to change, certainly our own families. I'm prayerful that it is the catalyst for making corporate America be a place where humans connect with other humans and recognize that we don't work with robots. We work with real people who do want to be accepted and who do want to be valued. So thank you guys.